and struggle in order to come to a place that welcomed all people, regardless of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And that story was shared here just last year with our partners in the Gay Activist Alliance that meets here every Monday night. And so many volunteers tirelessly stood sharing their stories of truth and wisdom for us to become a welcoming congregation. You see, Unitarian Universalists are like every other human being. We are subject to fear and to prejudice and to misinformation. It is just that we have a set of principles that call us to a higher-minded and deeper-hearted place. Like our second principle, which calls for justice, equity, and compassion in all human relations. We cannot afford to rest on words found in the scriptures written so long ago, even though we may find inspiration there. No, our tradition calls us to reconcile everything we read with the real lived experience of our community. This means that we have to be open to change our minds when we find ourselves to be standing amidst a set of beliefs or stories or expressions that are unworthy of adorning this holy place. And so in the 1980s, we worked, we listened, and we loved one another into a new place where all people were truly welcome. And I'll repeat it, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. You see, these principles call you and me into a shared ministry, whether you and I happen to be straight or bisexual or gay. It calls us both into a ministry of standing in the breach, which means to stand between those who profess hate and the prophets who urge us ever onwards towards the applications of love, justice, and compassion. I know for a fact that many of us have frequent opportunities to stand in the breach in both small and large ways. Today, you could write a letter to a congressperson. Today, we're inviting even our religious education students to do the very same. Why, just this weekend, I was traveling back from Boston, chatting with a neighbor in the seat next to me, when he made some reference, a euphemism, that his son might grow up to listen to show tunes, if I knew what that meant. I have learned, though, not to jump down my neighbor's throat, gentle angry people, too quickly, but to poke a bit and see what is lying there in the embers. I leaned over and pulled a book by Beacon Press out of my bag, plopped it right down on my tray table, titled Beyond Straight and Gay Marriage. And pointing to my book, I said, actually, I would have no trouble with that. This opened up a fascinating conversation about how much he loved his great uncle, who had served as a Marine in a submarine ship during the Second World War, where he met the man of his dreams. His great uncle and his dream man, who later became his partner in life, remained together until the end of their days, a relationship lasting 50 years that never honored with the title of marriage. What also came out was his frustration about his mother's venomous diatribes about interracial and gay relationships. The heat I felt from those embers poured forth in the story of pain, of reconciling his love of his mother with his love of his great uncle. He was right to connect the current hatred espoused about gay marriage with that of interracial couples. The rhetoric we now hear about gay families, we once heard and, in fact, continue to hear from time to time about interracial couples. Some of you may have read in the papers recently about a justice of the peace who refused to marry an interracial couple, claiming, amongst other reasons, that he did not want to be responsible for harming their future children. In a world where racism is alive, the children in our multiracial families, including this congregation, do suffer from the ignorance of people around them. However, to say that the love of their parents and the unique expression of who they are is insignificant is ridiculous. No doubt each one of them has the greatest potential to help lead us ever onward out of the thicket of prejudices and small-mindedness. Obama comes to mind. And that goes the same for children born or adopted into gay families. This rhetoric is not new. What I found in the pages of this book was a reminder that those of us born in the 70s need to look at what happened right before we were born. How many of you know that the rhetoric around single-parent families literally mirrored the rhetoric around gay families today? And that children who were born to parents that weren't married had no rights. It was not a family. In fact, there was one story I read about a family where the father had passed away and had 6 children, 2 of whom were not from a legal marriage, had sued in order to get compensation for a wrongful death. The 4 children that were his legitimate children received benefits, and the 2 children who were not his legitimate children were refused benefits. They were punished because they were not part of any real family. Judge Rehnquist came in on this side of things, and it was considered normal. And you could literally, it reads just like the defense of family writings today. Just exactly the same. And so it is so important to look back at our history, where we unfortunately see that this work of liberation is one, I agree with Mindy, will be one time and time again, but unfortunately sneaks back in. Human beings are subject to our own prejudices and fears and small-mindedness at times, but we can overcome it. To delve into theology for a moment, I might remind all of us that our Universalist forebears have asserted time and time again that love itself is divine in all of its expressions. In some ways, to cut ourselves off from the diverse expressions of love between couples and in families of all kinds, and to cut ourselves off from the generations that springs from these things, whether through adoption, whether through natural childbirth, is in some ways to attempt to imprison the divine. This divine capability of love cannot be imprisoned for long, for courage and compassion always come along with true love. Granted, we can make one another suffer and bring one another pain by trying to deny this love exists or attempting to confine or constrain it, but there is no hell or pain worse than being cut off from the gift of love itself. And that is why what we do here this day is so critical. To witness love set free is truly to witness the divine in motion. And I am grateful that in my position, I get to see this at work over and over again. Even right here, even in our hallowed spaces. Just 2 weeks ago, 2 women came in our front door. I happened to be in the great hall when they entered. They had driven from about an hour away, searching for a place where they could have a civil union. And they asked, "Do you officiate at civil unions for non-members? Might we hold our ceremony here?" And I said, "Yes, we officiate at ceremonies for non-members." And I said, "But I don't do civil unions here. We call them marriage."